Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, keep goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave, new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
We understand that it's very individualized as well. So we do run biomarkers as well. We can order blood tests for patients. And the other key thing is a lot of people, you may get a blood test with your doctor and your results come back within the normal range, right? But that normal range is based on the population. And for example, with thyroid function, some people can be smack bang in the middle of the range and the doctor will say, awesome, you're perfect. You're in good health. Your thyroid's perfect. But if you really dive deeper and understand the negative feedback mechanisms of what that's actually measuring, that's not optimal. Do you want to feel great or do you want to just feel average, you know?
welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 342 with Lucas Aoun. From a very young age, Lucas became interested in the effects of certain foods and herbs on his own physiological and psychological performance. When he was playing soccer, he found himself monitoring his performance very closely and discovered that some supplements were having a drastic effect on reaction times, decision making, and an ability to read the play. This then sparked a passion to spend copious amounts of his spare time to research various ergogenic aids. Having battled with his own health issues, he began to biohack his way out, getting to the root cause of his issues. Through relentless experimentation and research, he has optimized his baseline consistently to perform at a solid level. Today, Lucas's purpose and mission is to assist and empower people to reach their fullest potential. He does this by being an information portal and teacher, giving others the knowledge they need to manipulate their own physiology and behaviours. We settled in for a wide-reaching conversation in which we ventured down many a rabbit hole, including naturopathy versus Western medicine, nootropics and cognitive enhancers, the gut-brain connection, sleep, dopamine enhancement, and, very importantly, why all men should ice their gonads. With that, please give it up for an up-and-coming star in the space of human performance optimization, Lucas Aoun. Today I have a very special guest on the couch with me here at Future Squared HQ, Mr. Lucas Aoun from Ergogenic Health. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thank you, Steve.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. Have you had your nootropics this morning?
Oh, yep. I'm feeling sharp, feeling focused.
What were your nootropics of choice today?
Oh, today I kept it quite simple. Just stayed with one of my favorites at the moment is artichoke extract. And I combine that with a few other herbal constituents, which seem to help me with concentration and energy and stuff like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure we'll have time to deep dive into a lot of these nootropics today and how we can leverage them to optimize our performance in all facets of life. But before we go any further, you've obviously hinted as to what you do. But if I met you in an elevator and I had 30 seconds to chat with you and I asked you, hey man, what's your story? What are you all about? What do you say?
Well, I guess people can look at me as someone who is focused on the performance model and not so much of a sickness care, a disease state model. I'm focusing on how can someone who's good become 10% better at whatever they do. And a lot of that's catered towards athletes and sports performance. And I'm a big advocate for self-experimentation and, helping people become more aware of their own physiology and mental function. So
yeah. And I guess that is key, really, becoming more aware, because if you don't know what your baseline is, you have nothing to really measure yourself against. And it seems to me that a lot of people don't even know what their general markers are when it comes to, their health, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much. And a lot of people, well, when it comes to like exploring nootropics, which are basically, for people who are unfamiliar with what nootropics are, they're just any sort of natural or synthetic compound that can improve either any aspect of executive functioning. So like mood, focus, concentration, memory. And a lot of them are designed for long-term neuroprotection. So it's becoming a pretty popular space. Like in Silicon Valley, it's been around for a while.
It's been huge. I think Tim Ferriss got the wheels rolling a few years ago when he went down the whole modafinil rabbit hole, and since then it's just blossomed into so much more. I think the global cognitive enhancement market nowadays is worth about $2 billion US, and I think it was Gartner or one of the other research houses who released a report saying that by 2024 would be worth closer to $10 billion US, which might not sound like a lot compared to some $1 trillion industries, but we're talking about nootropics here, which has come from nowhere. So I think that reflects a growing interest in self-optimization that we see on a lot of different podcasts as well. Obviously your Ben Greenfields of the world have spoken ad nauseum about this topic for a number of years now. But I guess to bring it back to your title, if we will, as essentially a naturopath, right?
Yeah.
So define that for us.
Okay, so I'm not sure about like how many of your audience would be aware of what a naturopath is, but essentially we are fixated on healing the body and restoring balance through factors simply beyond just a medication, right? So we understand that like for someone to reach their fullest potential, they have to address various factors of their lifestyle. So sleep, diet, stress management, exercise, things like that. They all play a role in ultimate well-being. So yeah, and naturopaths really focus on, the bigger picture. Yeah. Whereas just a lot of people get a bit frustrated with some of the other forms of medicine where it's focused on simply symptom suppression, which in the long run, it just leads to more issues down the track. So we focus on the cause, like the root cause of disease or the symptoms, and then we address that.
So I guess with respect to what you're saying there with modern medicine, essentially focusing on the symptom, is that, the way I read that is that that's essentially a Band-Aid solution rather than addressing the underlying root cause. And one thing you've talked about there, which I think when I observe a lot of what's going on in the nootropics and cognitive enhancement community, it seems like there's a lot of people who focus on the 1% better improvements, take this pill, get a little bit better, take that pill, get a little bit better, but then they will neglect, for example, in the entrepreneurial community, people will beat their chests and say, I'm working 14-hour days, and they'll have lion's mane and emulsified MCT oil and all sorts of stuff at their desk, but they'll sit on their butts all day. They won't go to the gym. They'll get like 4 to 5 hours sleep, but they think that if they keep taking these supplements, that'll be enough. Is that enough?
It's definitely if you're in it for the long game, that's not gonna work out.
Yeah.
Like if you want solid productivity on a daily basis, like a good, like get into flow for 4 hours and then just have like a solid day throughout like the rest of the day, then you gotta look at it beyond simply utilizing these little short-term nootropics and thinking about it as a bigger picture.
Yeah. So the way I think it was Alex Hutchinson who I had this conversation with. He wrote the book Endure, used to write for Runner's World, and his analogy was, all that stuff's great, but unless you're getting your 7 to 8 hours sleep, unless you're exercising regularly and eating well most of the time, it's kind of like having the icing without the cake.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
It's funny. I wanted to rewind about 3 or 4 years. I think one of my first memories of Lucas was when I was an advisor at a company called Newts, which changed its name to Happy, basically a Melbourne-based nootropics company. You worked for them for a little while. And I remember you sitting in one of the meeting rooms at Collective Campus with a brainwave reader on your head, and you were meditating, and there was like a group of people around you looking at the brainwaves on the computer, trying to determine whether there was a correlation between the meditation and which brainwave you were in. And I was like, man, that is some next level shit.
Yeah, I do remember that day actually. I think I was just a guinea pig for a student experiment.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's the thing. It's being a guinea pig, I think, is something that whether it's a Ben Greenfield or a Tim Ferriss or someone like that, and yourself, you're always running these new experiments. And I see your updates, whether it's on Instagram or Facebook. This week I'm trying this week I'm trying that. The effect on my cognition was probably worse than I would have liked. I remember reading something like that based on something you tried. And I mean, what does that sort of cadence of experiment look like for you? Are you running experiments every week or?
Yeah. Well, I've actually noticed that in the last few months, I follow a very similar procedure. And what I do is I will first start out with just research, like understanding the theory behind a substance or a particular herb or something if I'm trying a particular supplement or whatever. So I'll do the preliminary research, understand the science, like really go deep. And like I really like don't even go onto particular any websites that are biased or anything. I just go straight to like the PubMed source and try and understand, let's say we're talking about a herb, right? I'll understand its therapeutic action. So like what it's intending to achieve. And then I'll look at it from a traditional point of view as well. So like understanding how it was used thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And then I'll dive deep, and then I'll just experiment with it. Like I'll source it myself, and then see how it affects me, and then I'll document everything as well. So like I'll keep track of how things are affecting me in particular ways, and that comes back to that self-awareness at the start, because without that, I can't measure change, and like I can't see what's working for me. And that's something I always encourage people to do, is to first like understand your baseline.
Yeah.
So then you can really understand what else is affecting you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it's just been it's something I've become very addicted to, and it's really empowering. Like it's really fun when you're able to, when you read something, it's one thing, but to experience something, that's another thing. And like, I remember the experiences. I don't always remember the theory, but it's the experiences is what matters to me.
Yeah. And that's the same as trying to learn anything. Like you can read about it, you can watch YouTube videos, but you're probably not going to remember it unless you actually experience it. Like whether it's trying stand-up comedy, learning how to surf, riding a motorcycle, all of these things that I've personally experienced in the past year and a half or so. If I just read about them in the book, one, I wouldn't be able to do them, and two, the memories and experiences that come with that wouldn't be anywhere near as strong. But for someone who's listening to this, they're like, wow, this guy sounds a bit loopy. He's like, sourcing all of these products from all over the world, running all these experiments and whatnot. I mean, what enamored you by this space in the first place? Like what got you into it in the first place?
Well, I used to play soccer for a long time. So that sort of catapulted me into experimenting with compounds that could improve my performance on the soccer field. So like physical performance, but also like decision making and like ability to tolerate stress was a big one. And
I read that you tried a number of different supplements and you found that your reaction time on the pitch improved.
Yeah, there was a particular one called acetyl L-carnitine, which is basically an amino acid that can cross the brain, so the blood-brain barrier. And it basically ramps up a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is very important for like memory, focus, and even the ability for like to send signals from the brain to your muscles to contract and stuff like that. So that was a pretty powerful nootropic for me back in the day. And then from there, it just sort of escalated, and I started looking at other ways to unlock performance in other areas of my life.
Yeah. And I understand a few years ago you also had some health issues which kind of amplified your interest in this space.
Yeah, and it's quite funny though, like at my university now, a lot of other students that are studying also have had a history of health issues, and they've been quote unquote fed up with the current medical system, and they've wanted to address the root cause. So for me, I struggled with acid reflux, like heartburn, for a number of years. And I mean, my father's a pharmacist, and I was put on a particular medication for that. And I realized that was not addressing the root cause. And in fact, it was simply a Band-Aid. And what I would do was I would use that medication and then just think that I could eat whatever I wanted. And so like I could just smash a lot of junk food and just be like, I'm fine. Like, I've got this. Yeah, I'm covered.
It's like when people pop a multivitamin and then go to McDonald's for breakfast.
Pretty much, yeah.
That makes sense. No, and I think that I can draw parallels between that and what I see a lot of entrepreneurs do. You know, they'll get into a particular space trying to solve a particular problem because they have experienced it themselves, whether it was, you know, Drew Houston, who founded Dropbox, and his whole thing was he got tired of losing thumb drives with important files on them and things like that, and having to back stuff up onto external hard drives and clunky. I remember actually losing an external hard drive that I spent hundreds of hours ripping CDs onto. This was about 10 years ago. I'm showing my age. And then we left it out in the sun at a New Year's Eve party and it just fried. And that was not a good experience. So I'm definitely glad that we have online storage and the likes of Spotify nowadays. But I think it speaks volumes to, you know, the impetus to want to try something, to create something, to solve a problem when you've experienced it firsthand. And then when you do try something like you did on the soccer pitch and you notice there's improvements, like that is very motivating, and it just pushes you to keep going down this rabbit hole. Yeah.
I mean, I love the aspect of, I also love the aspect that it's a very unexplored area as well. Like, and not many athletes really tap into that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I see that as a growth area myself, and clearly that's a space I want to sort of occupy.
Are you starting to see more professional athletes tap into this sort of stuff?
You know, I'm not actually entirely sure, but I know like a lot of UFC fighters and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters, some friends of mine, they really looking for things that can improve like focus when they fight. I worked with a table tennis player at one stage. Right. He was looking for obviously something that would help him with focus and like.
I imagine that's one sport where you need to be super honed in.
Yeah.
It's not like cricket where you can just be an outfielder and just, you know, scratch your bum.
Yeah. So I guess, and even bodybuilders now, I think what we're seeing is a lot of products are now using nootropics in their pre-workouts. Yeah. Because they know that they do have a pretty robust effect on brain function.
Yeah. I guess with focus, and especially amongst mixed martial artists, I guess in that industry, you've got a bunch of evangelists, if you will, who are pushing the merits of nootropics, whether it is the likes of Aubrey Marcus or Joe Rogan over at On It, and, you know, the Alpha Brain supplement. I think that's gained a lot of notoriety, if you will, within the mixed martial arts circle. And perhaps what you might see is that there might be other advocates within other sports that might, you know, start to push the cause somewhat. But yeah, it's definitely taken off within MMA. And
even the e-gaming market as well.
Yeah.
That's taking off there as well. Like a lot of people, gamers, like professional gamers, they want things that can improve their reaction time and like other aspects of. I don't play video games myself.
Yeah,
but,
neither do I. Well, the only time I play video games is when I visit my one of my nephews, and he always asks me to play FIFA. Yeah. And he's like, this time I'm going to beat you. And he almost does. But then I always come back with 2 late goals and beat him 3-2, which is, you know, I don't agree. And I'm not one of these guys who believes in letting them win. because that way they never learn. And you're not setting them up for success in the real world, right? They've got to struggle against adversity and then win the right way. So speaking of evangelists in the field and advocates, you did some work with Anthony D. Clementi, who is one of the world's leading sort of holistic wellness advocates or coaches, if you will. He wrote a book called The Ultimate? Got the name here, The Biohacker's Guide to Upgraded Energy and Focus. What did you do with Anthony? What was the nature of that work?
Yeah, so when I was working with Anthony, we were focusing on the digestive issues, and essentially he put me onto an elimination diet to basically see which sort of foods I was reacting to. He also implemented some other like sleep hacks, so the blue blockers. Yeah. Back in the day, and I'm not sure if your audience is pretty aware of them.
Yeah, let's talk about blue blockers. I've got some in my bag at the moment.
Yeah, so essentially, all they are is just glasses which you put on about 2 to 3 hours before bed, and they filter out all the blue light. And so essentially all you can see is like an orange filter. And what that does is with artificial blue light, it essentially, when your eyes are exposed to that sort of light, that suppresses our sleep hormone, melatonin. And I actually did some self-experimentation myself with my Oura Ring, which tracks my sleep. And I did nights with and without my blue blockers. And on the nights that I did wear my blue blockers, there was about a 20 to 30% increase in my deep sleep.
Wow.
Which is enough, because if you think about the repercussions of that, the following day, your energy levels will be a lot better, like based off just that deep sleep aspect.
Yeah, energy, I think mood regulation, so you'll generally be a more positive person, and also creativity as well. I think it's in that deep REM sleep where our brain starts to make connections between different learning pathways or neurons that we have gathered over the day or the month or the years. So yeah, that's fantastic. And just for our listeners, if they are looking for some blue light glasses, I picked them up on Key Australia. No, I am not sponsored by them, but it was like $60 or so. And if you can get a 30% increase on your REM sleep, that's a very worthwhile investment.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, so...
although I would also say, just before we go on, sorry, Lucas, that people should probably just not look at their phones for an hour or so before they go to bed anyways, and do something a little bit more calming.
Such as read a book or something. Yes. So with Anthony, he sort of exposed me to other areas of wellness that I wasn't even sort of tapping into. And one of them, funnily enough, he sort of knew that I was one of those guys who just loves to consume like information.
Yeah.
And he basically hinted to me that I need to stop consuming and start just living and loving myself, sort of thing. And just, being grateful with where I'm at and like all that I've achieved. So I'm still working on that today. Like I haven't perfected that area. Like I think I'm always, like all my friends around me and family, they all know that I'm always on the hunt for the next something big. And I've said this to a lot of people, is that I do wake up every single day with like a flame. Like I can't even, it's a sensation that I have that I'm going to discover something big for science. I don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be life-changing for millions of people. I can feel it, whether that's a nootropic or if it's some sort of health manipulating thing. I have no idea, but yeah, it's motivating for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I don't really meet too many people who tell me that they wake up in the morning with this flame, this burning desire to discover this breakthrough in medicine, in science. It's going to change people's lives. I think that's really cool. And I totally hear you when you say a desire to want to just consume. And sometimes that can come at the expense of, say, taking action. And, you could have, say, for example, two entrepreneurs. One just loves reading everything, every book, read all the books, listen to all the podcasts, read all the blogs. and have all this knowledge, but not really act on it. Whereas you might have another entrepreneur who will just go forward and act, make a million mistakes along the way because he hasn't read these blogs and books, but then learn, pick themselves up. You know, what do they say? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, keep moving forward. And over the course of, say, a year or two, the person who didn't do any of the reading might actually be in a much more advantageous position. But having said all of that, we're talking about two extreme cases here. I think the ground in the middle is essentially where you want to be, where you do stand on the shoulders of giants, you do read enough books, you do speak to enough people, but then you also take action.
Yeah.
But you basically, one side or the other side of the spectrum is probably not the best place to be if you want to get good results in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Have you found yourself sort of operating in one space and then flicking straight back into the other, or?
I think for a long time, I was probably in that space of consumption. This was going back many years, whereas now I am a big advocate of rapid experimentation. So I will read something or learn something. I will then put it into a backlog of ideas that I have. I'll prioritize that by how likely is this going to be to create value, and what's the cost going to be of this out of 10, so for time and money. And then based on value divided by cost, you get a value. And then I will say, okay, how can I run an experiment to see whether or not this is actually going to work? And then it's about putting what you learned into action as quickly as you possibly can with a very low fidelity version. And then, hey, if it works, if we get some positive metrics, maybe ramp it up. If it doesn't, maybe ramp it down, kill it potentially. But that way, by testing as fast as you possibly can, you get out of that analysis paralysis place, but it also means you avoid just doing stuff without having sort of leveraged the content that's out there. Because if I'm going to operate purely based on experience, then I'm basing it on one person's experience of life, of learnings. But if you're reading books and everything else, then you can be operating upon thousands of people have done before you, learn from their lessons, learn from their successes, and you're going to be much more likely to succeed. But it is about being intentional and I'm sure you're the same way with your experimentation, where you're very diligent. You know what your markers are, your baseline, what you're testing, what your hypothesis is, how long you're going to run it for, what success looks like, and so on.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, spot on.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of which, and this is perhaps where the males listening to this, and maybe even the females who are are partnered up, might want to take heed. When it came to testing and running experiments of your own, I remember you posting something on, I think it was on Facebook, probably about a year ago, where you posted your testosterone levels, and your testosterone levels had basically maxed out. I think at 30. What's the rank? What's the marker?
The range goes up to 28.
28.
And I was 27.3.
You were 27.3, and before you started this experiment, what were you on?
Okay, so I think I know what Steve's hinting at right now, but the intention of that experiment was to see the effects of icing.
Yes. What do we mean by? Are we putting like an ice pack on our heads, or what's the go here?
Okay, so the theory is that men's testicles, their gonads, they need to be kept cool for optimal function, right? And just in our everyday living, like they're always, because even if they're just 2 degrees too hot or too warm, they fail to produce sperm, and like the function of the gonads no longer work. So I did a bit of reading online. I did some research, and I came across a particular cooling device, and I read some studies on that and how that improved overall sperm function and fertility in men. Then I did a bit more research, and then I decided to just start experimenting with it, and started an icing protocol of literally just like 10 minutes a night before bed. And
for how long?
I did that for about 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And then got the blood test done. Having said that though, like beforehand, my hormones were pretty good, but it did boost me up a little bit. And funnily enough, I decided to create a Facebook group dedicated to this, and then
It's called Sub-Zero, wasn't it?
yeah, Sub-Zero. And you can ask any guy in the group, and they're basically just saying they love the practice, and they do it before the gym and before all sorts of things. And they love it.
Yeah, no, and I won't speak at length about my own experiences, but it is definitely worth exploring if you're a male listening to this. It does have does demonstrate marked increase in your virility, if I will use that word. Moving right along. So we've kind of skated around the subject, and this is time for a red button question, which is what the two Adams from the What You Will Learn podcast, that's their terminology. But basically we've skirted around the topic of modern healthcare and how we feel, or you feel rather, that it's broken in some ways, that maybe only addresses the symptoms, not the root cause, and that the naturopath approach is a little bit more holistic and gets to the root cause of things. At the same time, if you go on the interwebs, there's a lot of criticism of naturopathy in the sense that some people think it's kind of antagonistic to science, if you will, and some call it a pseudoscience. Now, I'm sure you've thought about this, and I'd love to know what your take on it is.
Well, let's just say that before we commence on this topic, that I'm not fully against Western medicine, and I totally understand that it's necessary for acute conditions, and if you've broken your leg, don't go see a naturopath. Go to the end.
So we're all for vaccines, of course.
But essentially, with longer term chronic conditions where people with gut issues or sort of arthritis or asthma or allergies and things like that, a naturopath will they'll take a very, instead of just spending say 5 minutes, you go to your GP and they'll talk to you. I'm not sure how much they'll listen, but they will essentially want to prescribe you with something that will just dampen the symptoms. But a naturopath will dive very deep and we'll spend a good hour and a half on a patient, understand their health history, and we'll try and uncover where the source of the problem starts.
Yeah.
And we understand that it's very individualized as well. So we do run biomarkers as well. We can order blood tests for patients. But essentially, and the other key thing is a lot of people, you may get a blood test with your doctor and your results come back within the normal range, right? But that normal range is based on the population.
Yeah.
And for example, with thyroid function, some people can be smack bang in the middle of the range and the doctor will say, awesome, you're perfect. You're in good health. Your thyroid's perfect. But if you really dive deeper and understand the negative feedback mechanisms of what that's actually measuring, that's not optimal. We want you, do you want to feel great or do you want to just feel average?
Yeah. If the average is representative of the person who doesn't exercise, eats a lot of McDonald's and everything else, and you're average, that's not exactly a good thing. Yeah.
Pretty much. So, that's one aspect, but naturopath we do focus on the gut a lot because we understand that there's a quote, obviously all disease begins in the gut. And we're starting to learn more about how far reaching our microbiome is for all sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I just finished reading a book which is here incidentally called The Mind-Gut Connection by Emma and Mayer. It was quite an eye-opener for me, and apparently a lot of the obviously the microbiome in a way is kind of like your second brain, in the sense that in terms of the traffic that gets sent from your brain to your gut and back, 90% of it goes from your gut to your brain and only 10% goes from your brain to your gut. And apparently a lot of this goes back to infancy, and even when we're born, and the bacteria and everything as we come out of our mother's vagina essentially, and that can then have lifelong impacts on health, as well as your disposition in terms of your mood as well. Like, are you going to be someone who suffers from social anxiety and all sorts of stuff? Like, I was blown away by some of the learnings, and I'm only like scratching the very top of the surface here in terms of the microbiome. But I guess it's still early days in terms of what we know in that space.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of your audience will be familiar with probiotics.
Yes, of course.
So there's a whole new space that's like, there's a lot of research going into it, and that's psychobiotics.
Right.
So they're essentially probiotics which have a significant effect on mental health. So like depression, anxiety, and things like that. And that's a cool space, and I'm always like delving into it and stuff. So just keep a lookout for that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and I was reading about that in the sense that if you eat probiotic enriched yogurt or pop, your 55 billion probiotics and whatnot, that it can have it can improve your mood, for example, somewhat. But if if you haven't got a lot of diversity in your gut, then you can be quite anxious and irritable and everything else that comes with it. But one of the interesting studies that came out of that book as well, didn't come out of the book, but it was highlighted in the book, was where they took stool samples from mice. So there'd be two mice. One would be like super active and social, and the other one would be very reserved and quiet. And they took a stool sample from the hyperactive mice and put it into the gut of the quiet mouse. Okay. And it then started to behave like the other mouse.
Exhibiting the symptoms.
Exactly, which speaks volumes about how your gut influences your behavior. And I think they're starting to run similar experiments amongst humans now. And potentially stool transfers could be one way you could help to allay people of their anxiety, for example, which next level.
It is. Fecal transplants are going to be a big thing. So
what else are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about purpose as well. So, nootropics, naturopathy, modern medicine, whatever the case may be, it can all help to make us a little bit better. Food, exercise, sleep, and so on. But my view on this, and this echoes something that Brad Stulberg, author of The Passion Paradox and Peak Performance, also said, was purpose is the world's #1 performance enhancer. Like, you could be getting your sleep and everything else, but unless you're waking up with a reason for being, a mission that you're working towards, you kind of just skate along. It's kind of like what you said earlier, where you're waking up with this fire in your belly. But if you haven't got that, then you could be like, all your biomarkers could be awesome,
pretty much.
But like, what are you gonna do now that you're superhuman? For example, are you gonna jump in front of a train or to save someone? But you haven't. Where's your purpose, right? So I mean, how does that play out in your work, or how does that play out in your life?
Yeah, well, I would say only in the last year or so, I've really started to hone in on what my purpose is and what I love doing and what is really fulfilling for me. And it's quite a bit of a paradigm, but essentially what I figured out was that when I feel my happiest, it's when I'm giving to other people. It's not receiving. Like, let's say I receive a gift. I feel better giving a gift than receiving it, or giving knowledge than receiving knowledge. And that goes back to my my belief that it is criminal to withhold knowledge or wisdom from someone else and not be able to sort of pass that on and improve someone else's life, because I guess that would be, for me, that's greedy. That's like, if you know something and you can straight out help someone else with whatever their challenge is, then just do it. Do it from your heart, because I mean, things come back to you, and you'll be better off in the longer run, and for your own mental health and for your own happiness. Yeah. Well, I'm speaking on behalf of myself.
Yeah, of course.
I feel amazing. Like the days where, and as I track my mood and my well-being and stuff like that, on the days where I've like stepped out of my own, how can I satisfy myself? How can I, selfish tasks and things like that. The days when I'm selfless and when I'm really helping others and like connecting with other people with whatever their challenge is, for me, that gives me an ultimate sense of value and contribution and purpose.
Yeah.
And it's similar to that vibrational feeling, but it's more of like, I'm so at peace with myself because I'm valued.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely huge. And I think it was Israel Adesanya, the UFC fighter. I saw a video he posted recently where he was just sparring with some kids in some rural village in Africa or whatnot. And his caption was, "I do it for the love, not the likes." And even, when I've received a message from someone randomly on, say, LinkedIn, who has read a copy of my book or listened to my podcast and just took the time to say, "Hey man, love your work. It's inspired me to start my own business, or it's inspired me to be a better person," or whatever the case may be. Like, I could be having the most, average day ever, but I get that one message and it just brightens my whole day and disposition up. And I feel like I've made a difference in some way. And then the rest of the day, I'm like super positive.
Yeah. Yep.
It's huge. And I'm sure you get the same with your work at the moment. Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more frequent as well. Because like, as I'm sharing more and more information on my Instagram and stuff like that, I mean, I wake up every morning and I'll get a message saying, "Thank you so much for what you're doing. Like, you're really helping me. You're really giving me some guidance or whatever." And I'm just like, well, another day at the office, I'm just going to continue doing what I'm doing because I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. And it's been really cool to see your evolution as a person and also as an advocate in the space, obviously setting up ergogenic health. And now your Instagram is blowing up. Every time I jump on, there's like just hundreds of comments and, sometimes thousands of likes. And this is only the beginning as well. I imagine it's going to get a hell of a lot bigger over the next couple of years. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how that all plays out. One thing I find, there's a lot of talk nowadays about the flow state. I recently had Steve Brophy on the show, who spent some time with Jamie Wheel over at the Redwood Forest in San Francisco and doing the flow certification course. And, I'm a big believer in flow. You mentioned it earlier. You can maybe get into flow for about 4 hours a day. One thing I wanted to kind of explore as well, though, was it's easy to look for sort of shallow experiences in life. And one thing that Jamie Wheel talked about when he was on my show was, give me something that's just going to knock me out. Because I find, and this was also in the Mind-Gut Connection book, where they talked about when you get into flow, when you have these deeply immersive experiences, it actually improves your diversity in your gut. It makes you more positive.
Wow.
And then you end up just feeling like a higher being for hours, if not days to come. And so I find that if I have spent, say, 3 hours sitting down writing an article and I've been totally immersed in that, I will get that feeling. Similarly, something else that will just knock me out is going out for a surf and just getting smashed by waves. Like, I don't care if I don't catch any waves, but just being out there, especially on a cold morning, the feeling you get from that is just like next level. It's better than any pill that I've ever had, legal or otherwise. But I guess that's essentially no different to a pill in the sense that it's stimulating a chemical reaction in your brain, whether it's dopamine or something else. So something I know you're interested in is dopamine enhancement. Talk to me about that, and how can we get more dopamine in our lives?
Sure, yeah. So throughout my experimentations, I started to realize that compounds that would improve dopamine signaling in the brain and dopamine function, they seem to really improve my motivational levels and my ability to be just focused on a particular task. And I also recently have started learning that most of us actually have too much serotonin. And again, this is one of those fallacies where we're led to believe that, I mean, this is not medical advice, anyone, but essentially a lot of us actually have too much of it. And strategies to lower serotonin can actually reduce anxiety for some people. Can actually it can reduce ADHD symptoms for some people. And strategies to basically optimize dopamine functioning, I've never seen that not successful in an individual. Like, I've never seen someone say, "No, I don't feel good," when they don't come in. Like dopamine is not about pleasure.
No.
It's the anticipation of pleasure.
Yeah.
And things that can, and then reward comes into it as well. So chasing a reward is driven by like dopamine.
Yep.
It's not that straightforward though, because there's like dopamine signaling in the brain differs from region to region, and also dopamine receptor sites. So that's where dopamine can bind to the receptor.
Yeah.
That will play a tremendous role in how someone feels and behaves.
Yeah. With dopamine, is there? I mean, I find that if I do something once and I get that huge dopamine hit, but then I do it again, it's probably not as big. And then the more I do it, that dopamine hit kind of gets blunted somewhat, that response. Is there something in that to say that, well, you need to keep increasing the challenge or the intensity or something, otherwise you're just going to be chasing the dragon, if you will?
It's sort of, you're basically touching on that reward threshold.
Yeah.
Like it's constantly being bumped up and up and up.
Yeah.
So to achieve that same sort of spike, you need to do something riskier or something more rewarding in a sense.
Yeah. And that's kind of like plays out in relationships. People have the initial honeymoon period. They're like, this is amazing, just flirting. And then after a while, they're like, I hate this person. I can't see anything but negatives and all those positives that I once saw. I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And I guess part of that is becoming more self-aware around how our brain actually works, so that we don't sabotage, relationships and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with that whole journey of optimizing dopamine, there's definitely a lot of nootropics that can support that.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a space that I want to get into because it's so far reaching beyond just simply like corporate workers, but even athletes as well.
Yeah.
With reducing fatigue and stuff like that. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, there's a bunch of biohacks and whatnot that I wanted to touch on with you today. We actually touched on quite a few. We talked about sleep and blue blockers, essentially. We talked about ice. We've talked about dopamine and serotonin suppression. Lots of good stuff. One thing I noticed when I was over at your house recently was that you have an infrared sauna in your garage. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So
I was very jealous, by the way.
You're more than welcome to come over and use it, man. Like it's free. So essentially infrared saunas, I would say possibly one of the most advantageous strategies to reduce toxin load on the body. So without a doubt, we're all bombarded with either heavy metals, pesticides, glyphosate, and all sorts of toxins. And what people are not really familiar with is that they store in our fat tissue. And one of the big excretion pathways for them is through the skin. And essentially an infrared sauna promotes sweating. And there's actually a protocol you can do. It's the niacin sauna protocol. So it's like vitamin B3 alongside an infrared sauna. And what that does, the vitamin B3 dilates the capillaries on your skin. And it helps facilitate the removal of heavy metals and toxins and stuff like that. So having said that, they're awesome for a lot of people. However, if somebody's very toxic, they'll feel horrible the next day. Like they'll feel very lethargic and fatigued. That can strip out a lot of the electrolytes from the body. So you really do need to know how to use it to your advantage. And I actually also believe that less is more with sauna usage. Like I only use it about once or twice a week. Any more than that, and I'm just drained.
Like what, 15 minutes or so?
About 25 minutes at about 55 degrees Celsius. And that's enough, really. And the other thing is Dr. Rhonda Patrick. She's a big advocate for sauna usage, and same with Ben Greenfield. And what I found is that it's better in the morning. I always thought it was better in the evening, but it actually ruins my sleep when I use it in the evening. And
really?
I'm gobsmacked. I'm like, I don't understand the mechanisms behind that.
That's interesting, because I've used saunas as a sleep aid. And some of the stuff I've read suggests that because you're increasing your core body temperature, once you finish up with the sauna, you get into bed, your body is then working to decrease its core body temperature, and that is kind of like a calming, soothing effect. And I find that if I have a sauna, say 30 to 40 minutes before I go to sleep, like I am just out like a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. But obviously, and this comes back to what you were saying earlier, modern healthcare oftentimes is looking at the average or the whole population rather than the individual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And having said that, though, with sauna usage, it has some interesting properties in the brain for our endorphins. And some of the chemicals that it releases, if you use it longer term, I think it's a very useful tool to increase your stress tolerance levels. And beyond that, it can really help with cardiovascular function and many other things. It's just another tool you can utilize.
I think that's fascinating to me, increasing your stress tolerance by having saunas so that you will essentially become more resilient in the face of all the adversity you will inevitably face in life, in work, in everything else. And that's something that I'm sure you partake in, which I derive having cold showers in the morning, particularly during the winter. Obviously, there's a lot of physiological benefits to it, but one of the big benefits for me is just discipline and willing yourself to do something that I don't really want to do it. It's freaking cold. Now in Melbourne in the morning, it's like it's single digit temperatures and the pipes are freezing and you don't want to do it, but you do it anyway. And once you're in there, you actually feel amazing afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing.
You feel awesome.
But before you jump in, it's like, I don't want to do this, but that's essentially life. Like you're going to have to do a lot of things you don't want to do if you want to get to where you want to go.
Yeah.
And that is providing you've got big goals. Otherwise you just live a life of comfort and watch Netflix and be really mediocre. But that's essentially not the profile of the person that listens to Future Squared. Yeah. So cold showers, what are some of the benefits to them?
Well, cold
Physiologically.
showers physiologically. So one of the most renowned features of cold showers is that they can increase norepinephrine and noradrenaline levels, which emit like acutely. So straight after you finish for about an hour or two, your norepinephrine levels shoot up by like 500%.
What does that do for us?
Oh, well, norepinephrine is a precursor to adrenaline, and norepinephrine in and of itself is a neurotransmitter. So that plays a role in sustained focus, arousal, like just a bit like how coffee affects you. It can just boost alertness and things like that.
Yeah. So with neurotransmitters, like if we have not got, say, enough norepinephrine, we may not think and make decisions as well as we normally would. Yeah. Is that what we're kind of talking about there? Or
well, understanding the pathway. So
like pregnenolone is kind of like the mother hormone. Is that what they call it? And and testosterone branches off that.
Derived down. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, with the norepinephrine, it's more of the arousal / alertness and focus aspect, similar to dopamine. Well, funnily enough, the norepinephrine is a downstream metabolite of dopamine.
So does that mean if you don't get enough dopamine, you don't get...
That's what I was saying before. Right. So like that's why I'd rather work on that building block there.
That's probably something people should familiarize themselves with, those pathways.
Yeah. And there's another... Well, that pathway starts from our food. And this is really cool, is like understanding that our food is the very, very beginning building blocks and precursors. Yeah. So essentially the amino acid tyrosine, L-tyrosine, which we find in steak and chicken and nuts and stuff, that then goes into, it converts into L-dopa, which is the precursor to dopamine. And then from dopamine, it has all the downstream effects into norepinephrine and then adrenaline. So people can use L-tyrosine, and it's often used as a supplement in nootropic stacks. And it's something I've worked with before and experienced. It's quite good. It's quite good as a baseline for some people.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess when it comes to food, there's a whole movement around fat nowadays. For so many years, we were told that fat is bad for you, stay away. And there are many who believe that this was just a byproduct of the food lobby pushing for that and essentially marketing all their high sugar, high fructose, high glucose foods as fat-free, despite the fact that they were notoriously bad for you and just full of sugar. Where do you sit in terms of fat?
So I've never fully explored and experimented with the ketogenic diet, just simply because I'm always training.
Because you're half Italian and half Lebanese and you love your carbs?
Yeah, pretty much actually. Yeah, I love my pasta. Having said that though, I think some people respond really well to it.
Yeah.
And let's uncover why. I think the number one reason for a lot of people is that they're no longer experiencing those blood sugar spikes throughout the day, which they previously were once getting.
Yeah.
And
so they're just crashing at like 2 p.m., for example.
Yeah. And even when you sleep, having good blood sugar control is really important because if you wake up multiple times throughout the night, there's a good chance that you're going hypoglycemic, and when you have low blood sugar, your body secretes cortisol to get it back up, because cortisol is a glucocorticoid and it gets it back up. But the ketogenic diet there's a lot of research in the field of like epilepsy, and that's got to do with the effects of like a high fat diet on GABA production, which is another neurotransmitter like dopamine, like serotonin, which is actually the brake pedal. So what that does is it's sort of, it's inhibitory. So it's a little bit like how alcohol affects a lot of people.
Yeah.
It makes them feel like they no longer have any inhibitions, and it sort of just slows them down a little bit, helps them feel relaxed and sort of calm. And a lot of people are craving that because they're either too anxious or just too on edge.
Yeah. And
the ketogenic diet for a lot of people makes them feel amazing. Like
I've experimented with it. I definitely felt clearer.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had a heightened sense of focus and awareness. Nowadays, I'm not on a ketogenic diet as such, but I would say that I derive the vast majority of my calories from protein and fat, and maybe only about 10% from carbs at the moment on average. But it's not up at like 70 to 80% fat, which is essentially the definition of, keto. It's probably 45%. But one thing I do practice now is the 16-hour-a-day intermittent fast. And this is something I heard, I think it was Ben Greenfield who spoke about this. It's not necessarily the fast that is why a lot of people feel better. It's caloric restriction essentially, because your body obviously has to work less to process all these calories and whatnot coming through, and also in terms of the microbiome, you're giving it time to just do its thing. You're not just constantly throwing shit down there. Is caloric restriction more so one of the reasons why people say that they derive a lot of benefit from, say, intermittent fasting? Or
I think that's definitely one element.
Yep. I'm sure there's many. Like with anything in these murky waters, there's lots of elements. Yep.
Yeah. But I definitely think that when you take a break from food, your body no longer has to like sort of process that. And anytime you ingest food, it's going to act as your body needs to learn how to detoxify that as well. So there's going to be waste products to that.
Yep.
So I think as part of like an intermittent fasting protocol and caloric restriction diet, the benefits are far-reaching. Like there are effects on the gut microbiome. It gives your liver a chance to start clearing out all the shit that's in there, like toxins and stuff. So, and also growth hormone goes up with fasting. You're pretty...
Yeah. So I used to be one of these guys who I train. So I'd, do a strength training session in the gym, and then immediately, like within 30 minutes, I'd be smashing, simple carbs and my protein shake and all that sort of stuff. Nowadays, like I trained this morning. It's now, what's the time now? It's like 9:36 a.m. I finished my workout this morning at about 7 a.m. and it was reasonably heavy strength training workout. I haven't eaten. I've just had some black coffee. But it, like you said, not eating within, say, a couple of hours of a workout, it can boost that testosterone level, essentially. At least that's what I have understood from my content consumption in this space.
Yeah, pretty much. And the growth hormone surge occurs. And actually linking it back to the sauna before, sauna usage is another great strategy for people to increase their growth hormone levels as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, actually I'm about to do a post on how it's better to avoid cold showers immediately after a workout, because that can sort of blunt some of the muscle gains and the strength adaptations.
I also read that you shouldn't have a cold shower after a strength training session because it can have a blunting effect, whereas you should have a hot shower after a strength training session. And if you want to have a cold shower, you need to wait a couple of hours before you do so. Yeah, which for a long time I was having the cold showers after a big workout, and I think it's probably been about a year now when I've stopped doing that, and I'll only have the cold shower if I've done kind of like more like a functional training workout in the morning where it's not about muscle growth, it's just about functional fitness and whatnot, and then I'll have a cold shower. But yeah.
You still got gains regardless, mate, so I wouldn't be worrying.
Yeah, thanks, man. I think I've pretty much been on the same level for about 10 years now, so it's not really gains, it just maintains. Let's touch on a couple other things, then we'll probably wrap this bad boy up. GDAs. Yeah. I actually have not come across them. So when I Googled what GDAs were, when I discovered them on your website, I was like, this sounds really interesting. And I'm sure our audience will think the same.
Yeah. So in the last few months, I've been really exploring ways that we can improve insulin sensitivity. For those who want to continue to eat like a pretty balanced diet with carbohydrates, GDAs can be used. So essentially they're glucose disposal agents. And what they do is they help your body utilize sugar, and they help your body use that carbohydrate into where it needs to go. So like essentially they either mimic insulin or they enhance insulin's actions in the body. So a strategic, a way to utilize them is you can essentially use a GDA anytime you're having, let's say, like a really high carb meal to help your body use that instead of it just lingering in the bloodstream, which is detrimental, like high blood sugar levels, causes all sorts of things. GDAs help your body shuttle that sugar straight into the muscle cell. And a lot of bodybuilders and athletes are starting to grasp onto it now and use it like about 35 to 40 minutes before their workout.
Wow. And
they get better pumps, better performance. And in terms of longevity, like if we care about longevity, GDAs, I think for a lot of people can be useful because we are starting to understand that like having elevated insulin levels, like being insulin resistant, can lead to heart disease and all sorts of health issues down the track. So GDAs are one of those strategies you can implement to, increase your insulin sensitivity, lower blood sugar levels, and I guess for a lot of people, it can make them feel less guilty about eating let's say they have a big pasta meal or whatever, have a GDA with that, and your body will be able to use that carbohydrate better than without it.
Interesting. Just on pasta and having carby meals, one thing I read a few years ago, I'm not sure if there's any truth to it, was that if you squeeze like citrus or a lemon over your rice or pasta or whatnot, it can decrease the GI sort of profile, and your body will process it slower rather than like a simple carb in one big hit. Is that something you've come across, or is this pseudoscience? I've been doing it for years just because.
Well, you're doing it for it's going to have beneficial effects elsewhere. So using the lemon, it's going to help with bile secretion, and bile is needed for emulsifying and digesting fats. So you're getting the benefit in that area. I'm not sure about lowering the GI, but if it tastes better, then go ahead.
It doesn't necessarily taste better, but it makes me feel less guilty, which I think is why most people do a lot of things. Hey, I'll have the Diet Coke with my Big Mac and fries because it makes me feel less guilty. Never mind what's all the artificial sweeteners they use. Apparently, they are just as bad for you as sugar, if not worse. In many cases, that's something that also came out of this Mind-Gut Connection book in terms of the impact on your microbiome as well as neurodegenerative impacts as well, which people just guzzle them down thinking, oh, it's a Diet Coke, it's all good. I can have several of these a day, which is pretty scary. Fantastic. Well, we have pretty much talked about all of the nootropic hacks that I wanted to talk about, or all the biohacks that I wanted to talk about, rather. One thing we should probably stress is that, like you said earlier, we are not against modern healthcare. I'm definitely not. I think it's about supplementing modern healthcare with naturopathy and a holistic view to things. And again, working with, because in any profession, you have good and you have not so good. And I find that amongst GPs, you have a lot who perhaps just haven't really kept up to date with anything, aren't genuinely motivated by their line of work. And in the world of naturopathy, you have people like yourself who are just like constantly like trying to learn and update their worldview and apply that and share that knowledge with your audience, which I think is awesome. Of course, with anything, it's about being somewhere in the middle, taking the good from world A, taking the good from world B. And again, I think if you look at, who was it? Michael Shermer, who was on my show a little while ago, alerted me to the fact that 50% of the studies in the social sciences, for example, can't be replicated. So all we know is what is most right now, based on the evidence that we've collected, based on how we've processed it, based on what we're testing for. But there is so much more we don't know. And it's just about trying things and testing things and seeing what works for you, and not holding anything as, as a dogma or whatnot. And I know that's one of your values over at Ergogenic Health, is that, non-dogmatic, and strong opinions maybe, but weakly held. And if new evidence comes along to falsify what I believe or what you believe, then you'll essentially change your mind on that. And I think that's such a key philosophy that applies not only in this space, but in life in general. Yeah,
pretty much, man. And the one of my mottos is to question everything.
Yeah.
Don't take, not even what I've said today, don't take my word as like gospel, but go ahead, do the research, challenge what I've said. And because I do that to myself every day.
Yeah.
Like whatever I research, I actually do a complete 180 and think the complete opposite. Like if I'm reading a research paper,
counterfactual.
I'm like, well, am I completely off track? And then I'll think of it from the complete other side. And it's actually happened to me a lot this year, where I've done a complete 180 and changed my opinion on a particular topic just by challenging what I previously thought. It's definitely something I encourage a lot of people to do, and to really, it does not matter what something says or information you read. I honestly do believe that it's how it affects you, and you need to take control. Like no one else is going to do that for you. It's up to you. And whatever works for you works for you. And
even if it's a placebo, as long as it works.
Pretty much, I guess for a lot of people, it's, if they feel like something works for them, go ahead, do it. I'm not going to question it. So, I'm a big proponent of taking full control of your health.
100%. And for people who are interested in having their views challenged, there's a really cool site I came across recently called changeaview.com, where you can basically post your opinion on something and then you invite people to change your opinion. So, but the way it works is, it's not like if I was posting something on Reddit and then you just have people just tearing the stuff down. It's done so in a very deliberate way where it supports healthy discourse, and it says, well, I understand your argument, but have you thought about X, Y, Z? And I recently posted something where I said, you can't trust your intuition because it is essentially a byproduct of evolution, genetics, upbringing, infancy, past experience. Like there's so many things. And if I'm going to trust my intuition when I'm making a decision about something that I've never made a decision about before, like for example, I'm choosing to invest in, wheat or something like like that, but I know nothing about agriculture, then trusting my intuition probably isn't a good thing, right? But then I had people come back and say, well, it depends what you're making a decision about, depends how much time you have to make a decision. And so you start to expand your thinking. You're like, yes, perhaps you can trust your intuition if you only have 1 minute to make a decision, and perhaps you've made a decision in this space before. You haven't got time to exercise reason and logic and everything else. So again, there's kind of, I found it very, very rewarding. And even because I write a lot of content and work on books and things of that persuasion, I can see myself using it a lot more going forward. Whenever I am publishing something which is somewhat opinionated, I'll say, okay, well, change my view. And then you can incorporate that into your writing and provide people with a more sort of grounded, sort of holistic view of the world, rather than, hey, here's what I think based on whatever I've observed. But there's all this other stuff I haven't observed that hasn't influenced my opinion. So I think it's just worthwhile because, we only know so much. And the worst thing you want to be is, that horse that gets led to water but refuses to drink, essentially. I think we can all drink the water every now and again, as long as it's not Kool-Aid. So let's wrap up with the 3-question lightning round, Lucas. This has been a lot of fun. Question number 1, and I'll change this slightly. If you could work with any biohacker, wellness coach, personality in this space, who would it be and why?
Geez, that's a tough question. I would say right now, probably Ben Greenfield.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, he's walked the path and he dives deep and he experiments a lot more than me. And he's also a wealth of knowledge, and he does share it as well.
Yeah.
And he's just got a really strong reputation in my eyes. Like he's just got a lot of personal experience in a lot of areas.
Well, he's also competed in a number of different, I think it's triathlons and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, Ben Greenfield's one of my idols.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate enough to have him on the Future Squared podcast about 100 or so episodes ago, so people can revisit that conversation. Speaking of icing gonads and things of that persuasion, I think Ben was on the Joe Rogan show talking about injecting his penis. I don't remember exactly why he was doing that, but
with stem cells.
With stem cells, yes.
Yeah,
yes. Yep. What would the benefit be of doing that? While we're on it.
Okay, so the stem cell therapy is basically, they're like precursor cells to any other cell within the body. And I think as you age, those cells decline, and Ben's objective is to inject them into his penis for penis gains, I guess. So
wow.
And performance. So I mean, it's definitely a pretty hot topic, and not something I'm very keen on experimenting with at the moment. I've got other priorities.
You're still young. So Ben's in his late 30s now. He's starting to think about these things.
Got other priorities at the moment.
Fair enough.
But
well, we'll spare you from having to talk any further about that. Question number 2. If you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, and it might be a Ben Greenfield, who would it be and what would you ask?
I would say Matt Legg he's a naturopath from Brisbane. Yep. Who I've been following for a long time. He's actually the founder of the lead formulator at ATP Science. If there was a single question I had to ask him, possibly, how do you bring a product to market? Because that's something I'm working on right now.
Yeah. Should be asking me that question.
Yeah, well, for the non-business side of things, more like the technicalities of the product, because I am working on a product right now as we speak, and I'd like to know a bit more about that.
Is there anything you can share about that product, or is it still early days?
I mean, I've just signed an NDA, so it's sort of a bit hot at the moment, but I'll be sharing that with you soon.
Awesome.
Behind the scenes.
Look forward to it. And lucky last, I mean, we've touched on a bunch of biohacks and whatnot today, but I always ask people, what sort of rituals or routines do you have to stay on top of your game? Do you have any that you kind of partake in on a daily basis without fail?
Yeah. So the biggest one for me is just I document and I record everything. Like I'll like sort of audit myself and like I'll just track my mood, my energy levels, my sleep and stuff like that. It's a prerequisite for me. Like you said before, you need that to be able to make change. And
just real quick on that, are there any like key biomarkers that people should be tracking?
Well, I mean, if they can't get a blood test, then I still think keeping track of like how they sleep subjectively without using an Oura ring, like they can still gain a lot from that, like how they feel, their energy levels, their focus at work or whatever, just self-tracking. And then from that, then you can sort of explore like nootropics and then infuse them into your routine, then see what's working well for you. And I'm pretty confident that there's a good chance that dopamine boosting compounds will support them on their mission. Yeah. I'm pretty confident in saying that.
He's very confident, folks. He's very confident. Well, if people enjoy this conversation, which I'm sure they did, they can get more of you over at ergogenichealth.com. You're on Facebook. .com.au. You're on Facebook and Instagram at ergogenic_health as well. Are there any parting things you want to leave our audience with?
At the end of this, I'd say possibly just anything that can improve self-awareness, and engaging in self-awareness is key.
Yeah.
Is key.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Lucas. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Stevie.
Good luck with everything, and I look forward to hearing about this very top secret compound very, very soon. See you, folks.
See you guys.
Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Glibeski and on Instagram at TheSteveGlibeski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.